Evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to everyone in the audience. It is an absolute pleasure and honor to welcome our esteemed speaker for this very special virtual session on the Right to Information Act 2005, a tool for effective governance, Shri Yashwardhan Kumar Sinha. Joining Mr. Sinha in this conversation as chair is Mr. Govind Raj Ethiraj. Before handing over to him, I would like to introduce Mr. Ethiraj, who is a television and print journalist and has reported and written on Indian businesses for over 25 years. Most recently, he founded Boom, an independent journalism initiative that fights misinformation and explains issues with the larger objective of making internet safer. He also founded the award-winning India Spend, a public interest journalism outfit which uses data to write and syndicate stories in areas like health, education, environment, and Fact Checker, which monitors media, politicians, and other figures for accuracy. He is also our Ananta Aspen Kamalayan Bajaj Fellow. Sir, with this, I hand over to you to please start this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shreya. Thank you, Ananta Aspen, for inviting me for this very important and useful session. A quick background, the right to information, as you know, has altered the data and information landscape in India as its equivalent efforts have altered the data and landscape in other countries in the West, and almost at the same time about 15 years ago. As we've seen more and more information come into the public domain, it's created an interesting situation where with more information coming, citizens have actually demanded more information, and with that information, they've also demanded more accountability and governance. So in a way, if citizens feel more empowered to demand more accountability and governance, is because of more information flowing into their hands today. So this also creates an interesting tension point, if you want to call it that, because as citizens demand more, the pressure on authorities within the government to provide that information becomes more and more challenging, places a demand on resources, and of course, it becomes a logistical nightmare, as it could be, because many requests come, and sometimes for the same thing, and particularly when we're talking about many states and a center. So it is a fine balance, and perhaps calls for a different set of skills and maybe a diplomatic effort, if you want to call it that, to manage this flow of demand and supply of information, which is very required and yet cannot be always met with given the resources. So it is perhaps apt that the person doing this now at the very top is Mr. Yashwardhan Kumar Sinha, who is a seasoned diplomat and has spent over 37 years in that space and handled several important assignments at the Ministry of External Affairs and various Indian diplomatic missions. He is superannuated from the Indian Foreign Service in October 2018. He was sworn in as Information Commissioner at the Central Information Commission in Delhi on January 1st, 2019. And before that, he originally hails from Bihar, and he began his schooling in Cheshire in the United Kingdom before coming to St. Xavier's High School, Patna, finished at St. Michael's High School, Patna, graduated in honors in history from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and masters in history from Delhi University, and joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1981. He has a diploma in Arabic from the American University in Cairo. So on that note, it's my pleasure to also welcome Mr. Sinha. And the way we are going about the session today is Mr. Sinha is going to take us through a presentation on the Right to Information Act and a lot of interesting data and insights on how it functions and has been functioning from his vantage point, after which we will have a Q&A, and we obviously invite you to send in all your questions, which I will moderate from here. So thank you once again, and it's over to you, Mr. Sinha. You're on mute. Mr. Sinha, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Ethiraj, for the introduction, and thank you, Ananda Aspen Center, for inviting me, especially Ms. Kiran Pasricha, an old friend and acquaintance. I'm glad to come back to Ananda Aspen Center, this time as an information commissioner and not as a diplomat. But you raised a very interesting point about diplomacy and the right to information. When I joined the Information Commission in January 2019, I was asked this question by a lot of people: what qualifies you to be an information commissioner? And I said, well, I didn't choose myself. There was a committee that chose me. But then I thought to myself, what qualified me? And I said, perhaps in diplomacy, you learn tact, you learn patience, and you appreciate the ability to listen to the other point of view. So I think these three qualities, I hope I imbibe in 37 years, and I'm hoping to put them into good use in my current assignment. But I sort of promised to speak about the right to information and rather than myself. So the RTI Act itself, as you're aware, came into effect in 2005. And last year we celebrated 15 years of the implementation of this act. We would have liked to have had a big seminar or otherwise a celebration, but obviously the pandemic prevented us from doing anything really. So as a result, we did commemorate the 15th anniversary, but we did it very quietly in the commission itself, having sort of suffered the first wave of the pandemic and then, of course, our hearings, etc., which I will come to later on. But the RTI Act itself, since it's been in place for over 15 years, is in many ways a historic piece of legislation because it gives a common man, the citizen, and mind you, the word citizen is important because it's applicable only to citizens of India, and this act, and the citizen, it empowers the citizens. It holds the public authority accountable. Public authority, of course, is clearly defined in the Act under Article 2H of the Act, but government departments, ministries, organizations, institutions, public sector organizations, PSUs, etc., public sector banks, they're all covered under the RTI Act. They're all defined as public authorities under Article 2H. And in some cases, we've had even the courts stepping in to decide whether a body or an organization is a public authority and does it come under the RTI Act or not. So we have come a long way in these last 15 years. And what has happened is that this piece of sunshine legislation really helps a better informed citizenry. And a better informed citizenry keeps keeps pressure on the government and on public authorities, not only to perform, but to be more responsive to their needs. And later on, I will share with you some cases where this has actually happened. But I think without much ado, I'd rather go to the slides. You would get an idea of, one, the scale of work that we are doing in the Central Information Commission. And I'm going to limit the slides to the Central Information Commission and not all the other state commissions, because the state commissions are, in that sense, autonomous and don't work under the Central Information Commission, but they do the same sort of work that we do in the center. And in the center, we took after all the central government organizations, ministries, departments, PSUs, banks, etc., and also the union territories of India. So all the union territories of India are under the Central Information Commission, including one exception, that is Delhi, though it's a state, but it does not have a separate information commission. It functions under the Central Information Commission. So with these words, I'd like to go on to the slide. And if you do bear with me, I am a bit technologically challenged, but I hope I shall get this right. But okay, I think, Govind, can you see the slides in front of you?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So now, 1 minute. Let me start off from, yeah. So this is the first slide. This is just a general introduction, the Constitution of India and the right to information. The crucial article, Article 19(1)(a), the right to freedom of speech and expression. the Supreme Court has defined the right to information as part of Article 19(1)(a) as the right to freedom of speech and expression. The RTI Act itself, the preamble talks about what it intends to do, basically foster transparency, provide information, enhance efficiency, etc. The RTI Act, as I mentioned earlier, of course, this RTI Act divides the Central Information Commission, the Central Information Commission and the State Information Commission, but they function in the same manner. So the three-tier system that you see on your screen is basically each public authority has to have a public information officer, whether he's called the Central Public Information Officer or the State Public Information Officer, depends on the jurisdiction. Then, so when you file an RTI, you file an RTI with the Public Information Officer of that organization. And the Public Information Officer is supposed to respond within 30 days of the date of your filing the RTI. And if you do not get a response, or you are not satisfied with the response that you get from the PIO, as we call him, or the CPIO, you go to the first appellate authority. You file a first appeal with the first appellate authority. Now, the first appellate authority is normally a superior officer in the same organization. So each organization, which is a public authority, needs to designate a public information officer. In many cases, they have multiple public information officers, depending on the size of the organization or the work that they do. For instance, the Home Ministry, the Ministry of Home Affairs, has a number of public information officers from different wings, different sections. And then there is a nodal PIO. And the nodal PIO plays a very important role in ensuring that the RTI application goes to the right wing, section, or right PIO as we to get a response in time. Now, when you go to the first appellate authority, so if there are many PIOs in one organization, there will be more than one first appellate authority also. So the first appellate authority then is supposed to adjudicate the first appeal. Now, this is where the problem sometimes occurs, because if you do not have a first appellate authority who can adjudicate the matter after hearing both parties, preferably, or by applying his or her mind and trying to see what exactly is the lacunae in the response, if there is a response of the PIO, that person, if that authority is able to do his or her job properly, it makes the life of the final appellate authority or the second appellate authority, which is the Central Information Commission in the center and state information commissions in various state capitals, their job much easier, because then the appellant or the complainant does not need to come to the CIC. So this is, of course, the three-tier system as it works. Then, of course, you have the role of the Central Information Commission. I have described the public authorities. One important point, and people ask, how do you monitor the work of the commission? You monitor the work of the commission, of the public authority through the submission of quarterly returns and annual returns. So each public authority is supposed to submit 4 returns every year. And their performance is also judged, and I'll come to that later in the slide. The most important point, in my opinion, is the suo motu disclosure. What is a suo motu disclosure? Article 4(1) of the RTI Act talks about the public authority putting into the public domain as much information as possible, so that it obviates the need for a citizen to file an RTI in the first place. Now, this is the huge challenge, and this is the crux of the RTI Act, and whether it's a success, not a success, how it sort of functions, it depends very much on how much information the public authority puts into the public domain. And to try and encourage them and push them in that direction, the Commission has instituted a transparency audit. Now, that transparency audit is very important because we get each public authority to do a transparency audit every year of its own work. Now, they don't do it themselves. There is a training institute that is nominated, normally a training institute that deals in the same subject matter as the public authority. And there are a set of objective criteria, questions on which you are marked. And then you come to a final score. So that is how the transparency audit works. And it's a very important piece of a very important cog in the wheel, if I can put it that way, in the RTI Act, because it helps in improving the performance of the public authority every year. And I'll come to some statistics there later on. Of course, these are the role, this is the general overview of the role of the Central Information Commission. Now, an idea of the number of public authorities that we have. You see the slide here, the bar chart. The number keeps increasing from, you will see from a figure of 908 in 2005, 2006, when the Act came into effect, to 2197. This is the number of public the authorities that are registered that particular year. So a total of 2193 in 1920 under the Central Information Commission. So that gives you an idea of how various public authorities who initially shy away from bringing themselves under the Act actually do so. And they are then brought within the purview or the ambit of the RTI Act. And it's important because the more such organizations come under the purview of the RTI Act, the greater transparency and hopefully greater accountability too. You would see the trend in submission of quarterly return. This is, I'll just quickly go, but this is just basically the public authorities who submit returns. You see in 2010-11, there's only 67.5%, and that figure has gone up pretty high to even 100%, 98%, etc. So everybody is now submitting returns, which is, or most people are. So that's a very good sign. Now you see the number of RTIs. Now this is important because this gives you an idea about how people use the RTI, how many people use the RTI, and how many applications are filed every year. And these are all financially, of course. These applications are the ones that are dealt with by the Central Information Commission. So there are other RTIs which are dealt with by the State Information Commission, and that number would be huge, considering the number of states that we have. Of course, there may not be as much as the Central Information Commission, but some of the larger states like Maharashtra or UP or Andhra Pradesh have a pretty high number of RTI applications registered in the state. The next one is trends in rejection. Now, what does rejection mean? That is important to define. One, rejection is where the RTI the request is rejected by the public authority straight away, not accepted. But the more important is where the public authority refuses to part with information. It rejects the RTI request because of various reasons. Now you see that graph steadily declining, and that's important because that means that the public authority is becoming more and more responsive. The number of second appeals complaints registered. Now this is with the Central Information Commission. So you see the numbers, they vary, but they're always on the high side. So we are, for instance, 2021, the number of appeals complaints received was 19,183 in my list. I think here the figure is slightly different. Is it the same? I think it is. It is slightly, anyway. So it gives you an idea of how the Commission is made to cope with the number of RTI requests that are sort of come in second appeal or in complaint. And a quick word about the difference. The second appeal can come under Section 19 of the RTI Act, which basically asks for more information, etc., not satisfied with information received so far. Complaint is basically a complaint against the inaction of the public authority, either through RTI, even up to at the stage of first appeal. So they come as a complaint where action is taken under Section 18. And in a judgment by the Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court, the commissions have been told to treat them separately, complaint and second appeal. Maybe I'd come to that later on, but as just an idea of the huge volumes that we sort of have to deal with in terms of disposal of second appeals and complaints. This has gone again, registration and disposal. So the blue chart is the disposal, obviously less than the number that's registered. Of course, it doesn't mean that the blue chart represents the disposal of the second appeals and complaints registered in that particular year. There is always a carry forward. So there is a balance that's carried forward of registrations, because the commission can't possibly deal with all the appeals and complaints filed in a particular year. So they are carried forward, and then sometimes it builds, and it sometimes builds to sort of proportions which are not ideally desirable. For instance, as we speak today, the total number of second appeals and complaints pending with the 1 minute, I think this is, no, this is the disposal. The total number is 36,783 to be exact. So 36,783 second appeals and complaints are pending with the commission. And some of these complaints and second appeals even go far back as to 2018. There are about 163 cases pending with us, which are 2018 or even before. So that gives you an idea of how the pendency keeps increasing as the number of second appeals and complaints are filed. This is an idea, this slide I included to give you an idea as to how it often happens that there are a certain group of people, a number of people who tend to be asking many more, filing many more RTIs, many more second appeals, and then as a result, the pendency increases. Now, this chart in front of you, you can see that over almost 11,000 second appeals out of the 36,000 have been filed by 390 odd people. And you see in one case, there is someone who has filed over 1,000. So if we are to dispose of these, however old or fresh that they are, then obviously the others who have 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm not going to comment on whether they're more genuine or not, but the fact is that disposal does suffer because of the large number of RTIs filed. Of course, it's a separate issue when we talk about misuse of the RTI Act, and I will come to that maybe in the Q&A, because that will be a better sort of occasion to dwell at some detail on that. But this gives you an idea as to how a certain number of people monopolize, if I could use that word, the Act itself and the provisions of the Act. Now, the initiatives taken by the Commission. This is important. We've been faced with this unprecedented pandemic since last year, and we have sort of started, while we were doing video conferencing and hearings from all over India, because mind you, the public authorities that the CIC handles are spread all over India, because the central government has, institutions and departments and organizations from in Andamans, in terms of the tip of southern India to the North India, East, West, everywhere. So the video conferencing is very handy when you're doing cases where the appellant is sitting, say, in Bhopal and the respondent is either in Delhi or say in Bhubaneswar. So you could actually link up, and that has worked quite well. During the pandemic, except for the lockdown period, where it was difficult to do a video conferencing, because video conferencing involves the appellant moving out to a third location and connecting with the CIC, because depending on where the appellant is and the facilities available with him or her, may not be able to conduct video conferencing sitting at home. So then we resorted to audio conferencing. And in order to ensure that there is not too much of a break because of the pandemic or any other extraordinary situation, we have been conducting audio conferencing right through last year, end of March, April, May, June, and some of us switched to video conferencing in July, August, or even later. I personally switched later to in November to video conferencing and not audio conferencing. Right now, since the second wave hit us, all of us in the commission are doing audio conferencing, and we are being able to maintain the rate of disposal. Of course, if the appellant or normally the appellant requests for a physical hearing or a video conferencing, we adjourn the case. But in most cases, appellants are happy to get their cases addressed or heard, even if it's through audio conferencing. I talked about transparency audit, seminars, conferences. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do much during the pandemic, but before that, we had regular workshops and seminars. We have an internship program, which we intend expanding. We get young budding lawyers who were actually in university in law school, coming and spending their summer with us or their winter vacation, depending on what's convenient. And we sort of attach them to registries for a month or a couple of months normally. And they write a paper, which is useful for us and hopefully useful for them too. We hold an annual convention. As I said last year, we hadn't done one, didn't do one because of the pandemic. Now the success stories, I think I've already gone beyond what I had planned to, so I'm going to just leave you with this slide and describe maybe one or two cases where you would get an idea of how filing of an RTI actually helps in resolution of a problem, of a grievance. Mind you, the RTI Act is not, and I must sort of emphasize this, not a grievance redressal mechanism, but often it turns out to be one. It was not intended to be, but it turns out to be one. Let me go to the first case. It's a young boy, the class 8 student in Port Blair, and he was greatly inconvenienced by the road that went to his school, and he filed an RTI, the advice of his father, and he filed it with the Andaman Public Works Department. This was in 2012. And because of the RTI filed, a responsive public authority actually took the initiative and got the road repaired. Now, obviously that was a grievance. The public authority or the concerned Public Works Department engineer could have just provided the information, but he felt obliged to do something, and he did. So the very next day they started repairing of the work, and this was reported in the media. We also picked it up. So this gives you an idea of how, in one case, how this actually works. Let me get back to the, yeah. So similarly, we have a case where a delayed passport was sort of expedited because of filing of an RTI. Sorry. 1 minute. Here, date of birth on Aadhaar cards was not there earlier. And Mr. Avinash Prabhune, because of the RTI he filed, the Aadhaar card was modified. In one case, you see in Baramulla, a masonry bund was upgraded based on an RTI file. So you would get an idea of how, well, let me go to number 9. This is interesting in Delhi. So if the audience is here in Delhi. Now here, Saurabh Sharma, And this is obviously someone from an NGO called Josh, who joined the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights to conduct social auditing of schools in June 2011. And he was unable to do that audit, his organization was unable to do that. And then they filed an RTI and felt that under Section 4 of the RTI Act, the schools should actually come up with a suo motu voluntary disclosure. And Mr. Sharma filed a complaint with the Central Information Commission seeking suo motu disclosure, which was ordered, and the CIC allowed inspection of documents also to the appellant and his colleague. And as a result of the efforts made by this NGO and the appellant, social audit of schools became common in Delhi. And the Education Department and the government of Delhi was obliged to display hard copies of all mandated information at the school premises. So this gives you an idea of how the RTI Act, or the how we've been able to sort of help the common man through just requests for information. And sometimes it's done even before the case comes before the commission, as in the case of Port Blair, the first example that I gave. So it becomes, as I said, a grievance redressal mechanism, though it was never intended to be one. And it does help in that way, it helps people. There are many other ways. I mean, of course, armed with information, people have been able to go to a court of law, or people have been able to sort of go in for arbitration, etc., because of the information available through the RTI mechanism. So I think while of course there are many lacunae, and we still have a long way to go to really implement what the framers of the Act had visualized or envisaged, but I think we have gone a long way since 2005. And I think that the very fact that there are a large number of people who use this mechanism for their benefit, to be better informed, and of course to keep the public authority on their toes and make them more accountable. So I think I'm going to stop here, Govind, and then perhaps I've already spoken longer than I should, and look forward to interacting with you and of course those who have tuned in or those who are online. If they have any questions, comments, etc., I'd be happy to answer them as best as I can.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha. So let me ask you a slightly broad question. So as you perform your duties on a daily basis, who in your mind are you representing? Is it the government of India, or is it the citizens seeking information, or are you trying to balance out even on a daily basis whose interests you best represent?
You know, that's a very good question. The answer straight away would be the citizen of India, because the RTI Act is framed for the citizen of India. But when you're actually adjudicating, then you have to keep in mind that balance that you referred to. The inclination should always be to try and see how you can assist the appellant, the applicant, because he or she has the right to know and the right to information. Of course, then you have to balance it against what the public authority can reveal as under the Act, not your personal preference, but as under the Act. The Act itself, Section 8(1), has a number of clauses that provide for exceptions against disclosure, ranging from sovereignty, security of the state, to personal information, fiduciary relationship, cabinet notes, etc. So there's a whole range of issues when you read in the Act. So you have to balance it. But the inclination always is to try and help the appellant as best as you can within the four walls of the Act.
Right. And when you look at the kind of queries that have been coming in your tenure as CIC, as Information Commissioner, and your understanding of the history, how would you classify them in terms of buckets? What would most of them be like in terms of category, and if there is a descending order?
Well, it's difficult to come up with a descending order, but what I would say is that about 70 to 80% of all the cases that have come before me, and mind you, I've been in position now as IC, NCIC for over 2.5 years, done a multitude of cases. There are genuine information seekers who have a problem, whether it's obtaining a license, a driving license, a passport, a ration card, an Aadhaar card, or getting that road repaired in front of your house, or getting your school mark sheet, etc. These are genuine requests that need to be complied with, and sometimes they are not. They be the public authority resists for whatever reason. So if you're able to help there, then you get this feeling of satisfaction that you have made a difference, even if it's a drop in the ocean. So I think majority of these cases that come up to the commission are those. There are some that are not, and it's difficult to classify them. And I
Right.
don't want to classify them in any pejorative terms at all.
Right, but therefore you're saying that, and the examples that you used in your last slide, that most cases therefore are essentially grievances to do with delivery of benefits or subsidies or a driving license, as you said, which is a document.
Yeah, so it's basically provision of public goods. That is the number one sort of broad category I'd put that, and where people file RTIs because they're unable to get it normally. So they seek the assistance of the RTI Act and the mechanism in trying to force the public authority to either sort of give them what they think is their due, or at least to give them information as to why it has not been done or why there has been a problem.
So if I were to ask you the flip question, if assuming many of these grievances were handled by those authorities, let's say the Ministry of External Affairs, which gives a passport, the local driving license authority, which is obviously under a state, which gives a driving license, if they were to handle this, many of these wouldn't even reach you.
Absolutely. But what's happened is because there has been such a great improvement in the service, and you mentioned two instances. I mean, since I've connected, I've handled both issue of passport and issue of driving licenses. Now, the way the system has evolved, everything has become online, it becomes streamlined. So the cases that I get now are the very rare cases of denial of passport service for reasons which are beyond the control of the public authority, in this case, the Ministry of External Affairs, or for instance, the licensing authority. So because of the RTI, perhaps, and also because of public pressure otherwise, and the government's action, obviously, delivery of services has improved tremendously. And in these two areas that you mentioned, and I'm sure other areas too.
Right. And if you were to look at the buckets beyond this, how would you classify them? I mean, and where do things like, pesky journalists like me asking questions about what's happening come in? I mean, in terms of quantum right now.
Nobody is, as I said, nobody is debarred. No Indian citizen is debarred. Any Indian citizen, including myself, can avail of the facilities or the provisions of the RTI Act. But journalists use the RTI. You see it every day. You see newspaper items about how journalists have uncovered this or uncovered that, or have been able to get the public authority to reveal something which was not earlier in the public domain. So this is the beauty of the Act, so that anybody can use the Act within the four walls of the Act itself to get the government or the public authority to be more responsive. And as I said earlier, the biggest challenge is to get them to declare under Article 4.1a or b on their website information that should be in the public domain, but it isn't. So that is the huge challenge.
Right. And how do you, so some of what you want to do perhaps in order to make your own life more streamlined, and I mean your authority's life more streamlined, would involve, let's say, some sort of gentle policy nudge to other organizations, as you pointed out. So are you able to do that, or is that something that you stay away from?
No, we do that all the time. In fact, sometimes even when the public authority has technically sort of observed the Act by providing what they feel it needs to be provided and not anything more. But they have sort of fallen behind as far as the spirit of the act is concerned, as far as transparency or accountability is concerned. We issue advisories. We do it almost on a daily basis. Now, whether the public authority listens to us or not is a different matter, but sometimes we do have the power to enforce our decisions. Of course, very limited powers, but we do have those powers too. So we need to sort of be very, very mindful of what can and what cannot be disclosed. And that is a challenge that we face every day in our hearings.
Right. You said that, suo motu disclosures are obviously part of the act, and that's something that you audit and as part of a transparency audit, and you therefore tell people how proactive is the government in revealing information, so that you don't have to ask for it, and therefore reducing headache on both sides. So give us a sense on how you are seeing that evolve, or have you seen that evolve, and what are the areas where you feel that there has been, in your mind, noticeable or notable progress?
That's a very good question, because the biggest challenge, as far as I see it, is suo motu disclosure. And the transparency audit is designed to encourage the public authority to move in that direction. Whether we've been successful, I think it's a work in progress. There you've seen a large number of organizations, I showed the slide, who's now started submitting their returns. Earlier, they were not submitting the returns. Now, those returns per se is not necessarily suo motu disclosure, but certainly they are judged by their performance in terms of suo motu disclosure. So each public authority gets a score at the end of the day, basically saying that you've progressed this far, and that score goes to the highest in that organization. So if there is a self-correcting mechanism within that organization, they can use the grading that they get through the transparency audit to become more responsive in terms of voluntary disclosure. So, but it is a challenge, and I realize that every day I come across cases where simple information, and I'm not going to go into what that information is or the name of the public authority, but where this information should have been very much as part of the web page or the website of that organization, but it isn't. So you actually have to order it under 4.1, and you have compliance mechanisms, including some penal provisions that the Commission can take to enforce that.
And give us an example of where, something that you found interesting, or you were pleasantly surprised because you found it in public domain because someone took that suo motu act or action to do so.
Well, that, for instance, when I was doing Delhi government in my earlier avatar as just information commissioner, because, each commissioner, the commission is divided. We divide the distribution of work, all the public authorities are divided among the 8 commissioners, including the chief. So earlier, I used to do the whole of Delhi government. Now, the constant challenge was to get schools, the education department, even the selection boards to display the results of their examinations of tests, etc., that they do. And you would think it's natural. I mean, when you go to a notice board, you see, when we were in college, at least I remember rushing to the notice board, trying to see whether I got a first division, second division, whatever. So I don't know what it is like now. It's all, everyone goes online perhaps. So try and get that done. And to some extent, I think I succeeded, especially in the what is called the QMR sheet or something. I keep forgetting the technical term, where the public authority was consistently denying, and and I won't mention the public authority there, because the board of the public authority had decided that this would not be revealed. And I gave ample opportunity for the public authority to justify why that QMR sheet, or whatever it's called, the multiple choice questions, why can't that be revealed to the candidate? And they really didn't come up with any sensible or sort of plausible explanation. So one day I ordered it, and then COVID hit us, and it was not implemented. And 4 months later, I'd had about 20 such cases and not implemented. And then I decided that I'm going to do something about it. And then suddenly the board met, decided, and implemented it. So that, so now, and a lot of candidates who had filed RTI applications withdrew their applications because they got the results. I mean, I'm just giving a personal example where I handled, but there's many more such examples which my fellow commissioners and others could talk about.
Right, and this is insightful. Let me take a couple of questions that have been coming now. William Crawley asks, is the Information Commission under the RTI a legitimate source of news for journalists? I mean, I know that, but maybe it'd be good to hear it from you.
It certainly is legitimate. Whether it's a good source or not, I don't know, because there are certain cases where which attract a lot of media attention and public attention. And I'm not going to talk about which cases they are, but I think the journalists who sift through, and there are journalists who actually follow RTI quite closely in the progress of the RTI regime, the response to RTI applications, the decisions of the commission sometimes, rarely, but do feature in the media once in a while, which is good, I think, because that's why we display our decisions up front on our website almost immediately, sometimes the gap of a few days on our website. So you know exactly which are the cases heard today, which are the cases decided today, what were the decisions, not just the appellant and the respondent, but the whole world, basically. I mean, it's an open source, so you can source your stories from there if you want to.
Right. Okay. A couple of questions on the flow. One is, what can be done to improve the pendency of appeals and complaints before the CIC? Is there a need for more officers? And I was looking at the data. You said the number of RTIs have gone up from 24,436 in 2005 to almost 13,74,000 in 2020. So that's a dramatic increase. The other question, not exactly related, but let me club it. What are the reasons behind the increase in the number of RTI case rejections since 2015? So I can see that the percentage seems to be going down, but but the number, I think, must have increased. I think it was about 14% in 2006, which came down to about 5% currently. But I think the absolute number has increased.
It's 4.27 is
under
the
5%.
percentage. So that basically comes down. Yeah, but the number, see, the whole problem is this, that the RTI, once rejected by the public authority itself, if there's no response given at the initial stage, that's only when they go into appeal. And it has, I mean, I don't know whether the numbers have actually increased, because the number of public authorities have actually increased. The trend is otherwise. The trend is the number of rejections have gone down, actually. And when it comes to the commission, we ensure that, for instance, I'll give you an example. Every third or fourth day, let's say twice a week, I get cases where the RTI is rejected because the IPO is wrongly addressed to the general manager or to the undersecretary, but not to the accounts officer. And then that the public authority is fully within its right to send it back, saying that please make a proper payment of princely sum of 10 rupees to the public authority at the right place. But to deny giving the information till that is done, which sometimes is done and still not information provided, we take a very serious view of that. We take a dim view. We pull up the public authority. Said, while you're very much within your right, this is against the spirit of the act that for 10 rupees you're denying information. So we sort of actually, pull up the public authority there. So this is one case where fewer rejections are now happening because the IPO is not addressed correctly or the money is not received. In one case, an elderly gentleman in Uttarakhand living in a village sent to Dehradun, where the public authority was, 10 rupees in an envelope. And the public authority said, I can't accept it. And since it is not accepted, we cannot respond to your question because the RTI has not been registered. I said, this is red tape. I mean, you can't do that. You have to, if you can't return the 10 rupees, fine, keep it in a suspense account if you have to, but please reply to the gentleman's RTI. He's 70 years old, he's in a village, he has some issue. You have to respond to him. And I gave that public authority 15 days after the hearing, or 1 month or whatever, I forget now. And hopefully, since I haven't heard from the appellant, the public authority has complied. But there's an example. But when you were talking about rejections, you see the number of RTI requests, the graph that goes up, and the number of rejection that goes down, and you'll actually realize how the rejections have actually gone down and not really gone up.
In percentage terms, yeah. William Crawley asked again, is the independence of the information commissions under threat from ongoing legislation?
I don't think so, because as far as the commission is concerned, we decide on the basis of the act and whatever the provisions of the act are. And if the act sort of prescribes a particular way to actually do so, we work in that sense quite in an autonomous fashion. But legislation, obviously, Parliament is supreme. Legislation can, in some point, circumscribe the work, because the Parliament is the one that's enacted the RTI Act, and they're fully within their rights to amend, to enlarge the scope. It's something that Parliament has to do. So I won't even comment on it. But as far as the autonomy of the Commission is concerned, it has not been impacted at all by any sort of amendments or any sort of other sort of executive action of the government.
Right. And as an extension to that question, I think Madhu Sharma asked, how will the CIC ensure that all public entities come under the domain of the CIC and get registered as soon as possible? So let me add to that as well. So I think maybe, let's say, if I'm an information seeking citizen and I believe that anything that has vague connection from my view to the government should therefore be answerable to me in the way that maybe other organizations are. So is there a way to transmit that simply, or how do you convey who is clearly a public entity and who is not?
So the list of public authorities is in the public domain, and all the public authorities are listed. But there are, and I think the lady who's asking the question is perhaps referring to certain organizations who have disputed the fact that they are a public authority, and such cases inevitably land up in the High Court or the Supreme Court, and there then the decision. And I'm not going to talk about any specific case. I think you're probably aware of some of the more celebrated cases that are pending in the Supreme Court and the High Court.
Right. So, okay. So, Advocate Shubham Borkar asked, what are the entities that are excluded from the purview of RTI and why? So, without saying which are the entities, could you define the entities that could be excluded and the ones that are included? I think you did mention it in the beginning, but maybe it would be worth revisiting.
If I may twist the question around and say which are the entities that are supposed to be, as per the RTI Act, under are supposed to be public authorities. So let me go to Article 2H of the RTI Act, which reads, if I may, a public authority means any authority or body or institution of self-government established or constituted, A, by or under the Constitution, B, by any other law made by Parliament, C, by any other law made by state legislature, D, by notification issued or order made by the appropriate government, and includes any, and that's important, body owned, controlled, or substantially financed, non-government organizations substantially financed, directly or indirectly by funds provided by the appropriate government. So this is the definition, broad definition of what constitutes a public authority. So any organization that falls within the ambit of this definition should be made a public authority as per the Act.
Okay, so let me ask you a slightly larger question and a couple of questions as we come to the end of our conversation. So, this is about data and evidence and greater citizen participation. From your point of view, how do you feel that citizens can become more data aware or data and evidence aware? And how can they use that to improve the quality of their own lives or all our lives as a country?
You see, I mean, when we go into data, we're already going into an area which is beyond the currently what we handle in the Commission. But with the penetration of the internet in India, the smartphone, access to social media, people have become, perhaps don't even need some of the tools available under the RTI Act to be well informed. They already are well informed. and which in a way is good, because then when they feel the need to approach the public authority, they already have a very specific question to ask or information to seek. So which actually makes the job of the public authority and of the commission in the ultimate analysis easier. But having said that, I think there's a lot of misinformation also. Now that's something that obviously we in the commission can't guard. The government takes executive action, parliament enacts legislation, and I know that that topic is very much in the news, but since I'm not directly involved, or even as a citizen, yes, but not as a commission in that area, I won't comment on that. But certainly easier access to information has made the citizen far better informed.
Okay. You mentioned that when you look at what the framers of the original act 15 years ago had envisaged, even today there are some lacunae. So what are the couple of things that you would like to work on or are working on in order to make this more robust an organization with a strong legacy of service to the people?
Somebody asked the question, and I didn't think I addressed it, whether if we have more people, more commissioners, whether we'd be able to. I think it's not a question of numbers, it's the question of how many appeals come before the commission. And the intention should be to try and reduce the number of appeals that come to the commission. And for that, we need the help at a much lower level, at the PIO level. If the PIO is more responsive, responds in time, perhaps, and I'm using the word perhaps because we are a very litigious people, we're not satisfied, we come up to the first appeal and come to the second appeal. But I think if the PIO is more responsible, if the first appellate authority, because that's where is, in my opinion and my experience, a bit of a weak link, because the first appellate authority, if he or she adjudicates the issue, then perhaps the problem can be nipped in the bud, or the necessary information provided at that stage, and no need for a second appeal to be filed. That's one. And of course, as I mentioned, suo moto disclosure, if that happened. So that would ease the pressure on the whole RTI mechanism. Right now, we are sort of overwhelmed by the number of cases that we have to do. So each commissioner is doing between 15 to 20 cases every working day. Perhaps some commissioners take one day off, like I do on a Friday, to sort of try and get all the cases together, put my decisions out, see for the causes for next week. And I also am entrusted with the supervision of the work of the CIC. So I need to devote some time there too. So I think that is the answer, really, to make information as freely available as possible and cut down on the number of second appeal and complaints that come to the commissions.
Right. Absolutely. Last question. So you said that a lot of smart interns come and work with you. What's one idea that you've taken from an intern or some of these interns and implemented in recent past?
I'll tell you about one intern that worked in the commission, and she wrote something about the misuse of the RTI Act. Now, it's very interesting because obviously she took case studies and she sort of amplified on that. Now, that's something that we could actually write volumes on, because we see that practically on a daily basis. But these are important inputs into this when decision makers decide. The second is the first appellate authority I mentioned. Somebody did some work on how the first appellate authority responds to applications. So all this is very useful for us, and inputs not only by the commission is concerned, but also people who are in the decision-making capacities as far as the act itself is concerned.
Right, Mr. Sinha, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts candidly. Thank you for responding to all the questions. Thank you all of you for joining us on this discussion on Right to Information Act 2005, a tool for effective governance. And hopefully you are now armed with more insights and information on how to use this to improve the lot of all our lives. Thank you very much again, Mr. Sinha.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.